Dr. Darby here, and I just want to share a vital piece of information regarding your spinal health, specifically your spinal discs. So we've probably heard the term disc bulge or herniation before. So in this video, I'm just going to break down what those terms mean and what their impacts are on our body. And so the discs act as the shock absorbers in between each backbone of our body. Now our spine gives us the ability to bend and move and twist, which is really, really cool, but it's also protecting something vitally important, namely our spinal cord and all the nerves that stem from them. And so through this spinal cord and all these nerves is how our brain communicates with our body. And so if we have any sort of misalignment or a disc injury that's creating irritation to these nerves, we're going to have downstream dysfunction because that's how the brain is talking to these areas. And if it can't get that energy, that life force through to our stomach or our heart, that area is going to be weaker. And that weakened area is going to be more susceptible to disease and dysfunction. And so that's why these discs start to cause downstream problems away from the spine. And so let's go over some basic anatomy, and then we're going to get into what each individual terms mean. So the disc is the shock absorber in between each backbone, and it lies in front of the spinal cord and all these nerves. And so this is the view from the top. The disc itself it's very much like a jelly-filled donut. It has a bunch of concentric rings of connective tissue that keep the jelly-like shock absorber contained in the middle of the spine. And so if there is any sort of misalignment or injury that gets that jelly out backwards, that's where it's going to interfere with the spinal cord and nerves. And so getting into our terms now, the most common is the disc bulge. Now this is present in a lot of people. In fact, 9% of 10-year-olds already have disc bulges and associated spinal arthritis developing. Now in our 50-year-olds, we're actually over 85% of the population. Now, some of these experience pain, some of them don't, but they're always causing downstream issues to some degree or another because we're getting irritation to those nerves. So a bulge is typically the first step of a disc injury. It's typically more broad-based, and that fluid is still contained within the middle, and we're getting a pressure back towards that spinal nerve and spinal cord. This is commonly caused by a chronic misalignment in the spine that's creating unequal loading and pressure that's pushing the jelly out towards one side. And so this is kind of showing how that goes back into the spinal cord. A bulge left unaddressed will typically progress into a protrusion. This is where that misalignment is kind of getting worse over time because nothing's being done about it. And now that disc material on the inside is actually punching through some of the layers that are containing it. Now this is where that broad-based bulge is going to get a bit more pinpoint and a bit further extended into the spinal cord and spinal nerve. Now conversely, protrusions and herniations can be caused by acute injury or like a car accident or a ski injury or something like that. Something where the spine's getting a lot of whiplash, a lot of trauma to it. It can bypass this and it can squeeze that jelly out really aggressively. So now a herniation is a step up from a protrusion. Again, it's extending further out past the normal boundaries, and it's typically more sharp, more pinpoint, because this is always trauma related. This is due to some sort of single event starting this process, pushing the jelly really sharply, tearing through multiple layers of those rings, creating a lot of pressure back into the spinal cord and spinal nerve. Now, herniations, protrusions, and bulges can all be managed conservatively through chiropractic care. In fact, chiropractic care is really the only true solution to these because unless we address the spinal misalignment, that asymmetric loading creating that bulge or herniation or protrusion is going to be unaddressed. And so exercise actually can cause sometimes more wear and tear on these structures because the spine is still misaligned or poorly aligned. And so we don't want to just take pain pills to cover these up because that's just going to allow them to get worse. So we got to get the spine back properly adjusted so that these can get better. Now, if we don't address these, sometimes they can turn into a sequestered disc. This is where that jelly-like substance has pushed all the way through all the layers And now it's actually leaking down into the spinal cord area, creating a lot of irritation and a lot of dysfunction in the spinal cord and spinal nerves. Now, these unfortunately can typically only be managed through surgery. And so we want to avoid these at all costs, which is why we want to get our spines checked ahead of time to stop this progression and just to start them getting better. So I look forward to serving you in future videos where we can go into more detail about how we get these well and what you can do about them to prevent, and then also if you do have these already, what you can do as well on your own to get them better.